Hello, and welcome to yet another video. This video is a video essay, but a kind that I have not done before. This video is very subjective, but it is something that I have been feeling quite strongly as of late, hence why I am here before you now. I want to present an argument in favor of having Fallout and Fallout 2 style antagonists return to the newer games. There is no disagreeing that older Fallouts and newer Fallout games have many differences, and this is one that I would like to see changed in coming titles. I have 6 main points that I believe, when done well, lead to an impactful and memorable antagonist, which in turn leads to a more meaningful and memorable game. Also, wait till the end of the video to get my section on corrections and mentions from all of you guys. So to get this rambling intro done with, let's begin with the very first point. Mythical background. An important aspect of making an important character memorable is establishing a kind of mythos as the player progresses and engages with the world. A mythical background would seem to imply that everything within this mystical background is fake or untrue. This is not the case. In fact, it is more compelling when there is a good amount of truth mixed in with the mythical background. Going a step further and adding in contradictory information just adds to the mythical background, because we as players are forced to reconcile these contradictions and decide who or what we believe to be the truth. The premier example of this is Legate Lanius, or the Monster of the East from Fallout New Vegas. We are told by Caesar that Lanius was the greatest warrior of a tribe called the Hydebarks. After delaying the Legion's attempts at subduing and absorbing the Hydebark tribe, which was their modus operandi as they conquered territory and peoples, the Hydebark chief decided to capitulate, which enraged Lanius. In anger, he fell upon the warriors in his own tribe, killing several of them and having his face seriously disfigured in the fighting. Caesar saw his potential as a fighter and indomitable spirit, and had him rescued. Caesar then gave him the chance to join the Legion, and Lanius agreed, with the only condition be that he be given the opportunity to finish what he started and kill the rest of the men of his tribe. His disfigured face is why he wears a mask everywhere he goes, and it is even said that his servants are struck blind so that they wouldn't be able to look upon his maskless face. While Caesar certainly has a motive to spread a false and terrifying narrative of his lead commander, this is all thrown into question by the fact that Joshua Graham, who previously served as Caesar's chief military commander, does not even know who Lanius is. While Lanius only had his Latin name, meaning butcher, given to him at some point as a sign of honor, it only seems logical that Joshua Graham would have at least known of a ruthless and ambitious warrior like Lanius. Lucius, the leader of the Praetorian Guard, states that Lanius was born into slavery but quickly worked his way up the chain of command due to his ambition and talent as a fighter. Antony, the Houndmaster, seems to be closer to Caesar's story, but states that it took years to conquer the Hydebark tribe, and the men of the tribe were assimilated and not killed by Lanius. Even the fact that his face is disfigured cannot be taken at face value, as it is just as likely that his servants are blind not in order to see his disfigured face, but to not see his non-disfigured face, and therefore contradict the narrative. This backstory is a fantastic example of building a mythical background, as it is sourced from several people, and it is up to the player character to decide what they believe to be true. It also serves a special purpose of building an image in our mind before we have ever even met the character, which leads to increased player anticipation for the first encounter with them. Admittedly, Fallout and Fallout 2 do not do this as well with their principal antagonists when compared to Legate Lanius. However, they do so better than most of the Bethesda titles. Kellogg from Fallout 4 and President Eden from Fallout 3 are the best examples from those games. However, in both cases, we learn more about them upon meeting them or after our encounter with them, because there is an intended twist in both cases. For Kellogg, there was intended misdirection to make the player believe that no time had passed, and Kellogg's Institute modifications helped him look the same as when we first encountered him. To serve that end, Very little is revealed to the player about Kellogg until encountering him the first time, and in the memory sequences afterwards. President Eden was also a twist where, after hearing Eden speak on Enclave radio for most of the game, we come to find that he is an AI housed in a supercomputer at Raven Rock. Eden creates a bit of his own mythos by bringing up his fictitious childhood, but usually goes on ideological rants and diatribes. An interesting background makes the character stick out in the player's mind. It also feeds directly into the next point, which is player anticipation of their interactions with the antagonist. Player anticipation. Anticipation, with improper pacing, can create great motivation for a player to advance the storyline. Often, the build-up, when properly done, makes the encounter, whether it be the initial or the final encounter, much more visceral and memorable. How Frank Horrigan in Fallout 2 is presented to the player over the course of the game is a great example of building anticipation to finally meeting him. The first encounter is a scripted event that takes place on or around August 30th, 2241. When traveling in the overworld, the player will be loaded into a scene where Frank Horrigan and 2 other Enclave soldiers are demanding a man and his family come with them. When the man refuses Horrigan's demands, he very callously orders their execution. After exterminating these poor wastelanders, he tells the player character to leave as it is none of their affair. Knowing nothing of the Enclave, or Frank Horrigan, the viciousness and enormous stature of the man is immediately striking, and it is obvious that this will not be the last time you see him. The next 2 encounters are not directly between the player and Frank Horrigan, but video footage capturing some of his misdeeds can be found on 2 separate occasions. Usually encountered first, Vault 13 is found to house a group of intelligent Deathclaws, who you can interact with and assist, like any other group in the game. After speaking with the leader and leaving the vault, the next time the player visits the vault, they find the Deathclaws killed and their eggs destroyed. Only one mysterious person draped in a large cloak is there, and you can speak with him. Going to the main computer, the player can review security footage to find out what happens. What they see is Frank Horrigan confronting Gruthar, the Deathclaw leader, after having massacred all the other Deathclaws. After a short exchange where Gruthar openly defies Frank Horrigan, Horrigan walks up to the Deathclaw and kills him with a single punch. Given that Deathclaws are some of the most fearsome creatures that can be encountered in the wastes, watching one get one hit KO'd is quite shocking, and it's immediately apparent that Horrigan is as powerful as he is terrible. Usually the third encounter is more security footage of Horrigan confronting Matthew in San Francisco. Matt is the Brotherhood of Steel agent that is staffing the outpost and gives the player a mission to steal vertibird blueprints. After successfully accomplishing this task and returning to Matthew, any other trip back to the outpost will show that Matthew has been murdered and the security footage shows who is behind it. A short interaction once again shows the fate of those that stand up to Frank Horrigan. This time, we see Horrigan laugh off several shots from Matt's turbo plasma rifle, which is a strong weapon in its own right, and blasts Matt into bits with a single punch. Although his proclivity for wanton violence is to be expected at this point, he very callously asks his accompanying soldiers if they want to go eat lunch since it's around 12 o'clock. All of these encounters, direct and indirect, build anticipation for eventually facing him later in the game. It is established how hyper-violent and vicious he is, how easily he kills things even as strong as a Deathclaw, how he can laugh off any attempted attacks, and ultimately, how completely callous and inhuman he seems by his disregard for life. This is bolstered by the player feeling a need for justice or revenge, given that all his victims seem innocent, and at least 2 of them the player generally has a good relationship and high opinion of. The Master isn't revealed in the same manner as Frank Horrigan, and the player will play through a great deal of the game before they first hear references to the Master, although they will likely not know what they are referencing. Harold is usually one of the first to directly reference the Master, or Richard Gray as Harold knew him before they were both mutated. Most of what the player hears of the Master is from the children of the Cathedral, but it isn't always clear if they are referring to a real person or some spiritual figure. Once the player has found some of the secrets of the cathedral and proceeds to the lower levels of what used to be the Los Angeles Vault, it is apparent that the player will encounter something dark at the end. The encounters with the various psychers on the way to the final confrontation with the Master only builds the anticipation, as these never before encountered enemies with strange powers make the player wonder what monstrosity could be next. Strong ideology. An ideology is extremely important for any character to attain a level of depth. The ideology does not have to be extremely complicated, however, it has to be understandable and consistent. As players, we more readily accept an ideology that we disagree with if it makes sense, is internally consistent, and is not contradicted by the character's actions or decisions. This is an important aspect of characters in general, and is apparent when looking at the primary antagonists of the Fallout series. In Fallout, once the player has interacted with the Lieutenant and the Master, their motivations are understandable and consistent. Even though they don't agree between themselves on some points, like why some people make dumb mutants when dipped. However, their belief in the superior ability of super mutants to thrive in the new radioactive world and the push to unify humans into a single uniform race is consistent and understandable. The Master's actions in seeking out those who haven't been exposed to radiation and his creation of the children of the cathedral are understandable as they work to further his goal of unity. While Frank Horrigan himself was not a philosophical giant, he was fiercely loyal to the Enclave. And the Enclave did have a very distinct ideology and goals to achieve their aims. The Enclave believed to be the legitimate continuation and governing body of the United States, and have the desire to assert what they view as their rightful control and destroy all the abominations and mutations that came as a result of the Great War. Their emphasis on advanced technology, which helps them punch above their weight, is used ruthlessly to achieve their aims. Horrigan is in many ways the embodiment of the Enclave, where he is unwavering in his loyalty, while being the melding of man and technology that executes his missions without an ounce of compassion. We have a horrifying, though understandable and consistent ideology again that drives the antagonist. In contrast, Fallout 4 has two antagonists whose ideologies either are not clear or not fleshed out, and therefore end up being unsatisfying to the player. Kellogg helps drive the plot for the beginning of the game, but his motivations are not clear, other than he works for the Institute. After speaking with Kellogg, it isn't immediately clear what Kellogg's motivations are, outside of being the Institute's surface muscle man, and seeing you as a threat which he admires due to your tenacity and desire to be a good father. It isn't until later we find out more about Kellogg, but his motivations and ideology are still not entirely clear. We know he turned into a mercenary after his family was killed, and was a drifter, ending up in the Commonwealth. He found employment with the Institute and stuck around despite him being treated as an outsider by those in the Institute. He seems to be strongly motivated by selfishness and an attempt to run away from the pain of losing his family, but there is not much more than that. Father is the other character with a nebulous ideology. When trying to understand why Father created Synth Sean, why he played games rather than establishing direct contact after you had awoken from cryosleep, and even his aims in the Institute and what they are doing in the Commonwealth are not explained. You often hear the phrase, "mankind redefined," from Father and those from within the Institute. But other than being a fine slogan, what does that mean? How are the abductions, secret infiltrations, and operations on the surface redefining mankind? How are they serving a goal that is firmly planted in the ideology of Father and the Institute? The lack of cohesiveness makes the antagonists less engaging, particularly on subsequent playthroughs, and after having completed the game and reflecting back on it. Uniqueness. The fourth main point that I believe is an important aspect of creating a great antagonist is making them unique. Due to Fallout's world, there are so many options for unique and interesting characters and creatures. Some of the most memorable characters only are so because they stand out from the rest. My first playthrough of Fallout New Vegas, one of my favorite companions was Lily, merely due to the fact that she was a Grandma Nightkin with memory issues, and there just wasn't any other person like that in the whole game. Similarly, having a unique antagonist is just another way to solidify them in your memory. Looking at the Master, well, I think this goes without saying, there really is nothing like him in the rest of the Fallout games. His appearance certainly is unique, with his grotesque and visually interesting amalgamation of computers, human body parts, and other strange appendages. When he speaks with a few different voices, which will often repeat themselves, giving him a bizarre and unsettling speech pattern.
What shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die!
Since he is integrated with the computers in the vault he has since turned into his lair, the computer screens visually reflect the Master's speech. The Master also has the unique option to be reasoned with, and when it is shown that his plan cannot be realized due to the sterility issue with super mutants, he destroys himself, without the player having to lift a single finger. The fight is also memorable due to the Master having bonded with the Overseer desk that has 2 mounted Gatling guns. All of this works together to make an antagonist that stands out among all the enemies and characters that you encounter throughout the game. Frank Horrigan is also quite unique, although one could argue not as unique as the Master. There are many power armor-clad Enclave soldiers, yes, but there are none with his power or stature in the whole game. His sprite is distinct because of his size, and his voice when in the talking head view is very menacing, as is his general appearance. Frank Horrigan, other than his propensity to one-punch enemies into oblivion, displays 2 unique and menacing weapons in the final confrontation, including his large blade that comes out of his suit on command, and an integrated plasma gun that does enormous damage. Frank Horrigan's death is yet another unique aspect. He is split in 2 at the waist and drags his upper body forward, propping himself up to offer one last taunt to the Chosen One, and laugh as he tells the player that his fate is sealed as the oil rig self-destructs. With that, he utters one last
Semper Fi,
as his head explodes as if under immense pressure. These 2 encounters are so different from any other encounter in the game, both new and old, that they always stick with players. The earlier games cannot be thought of in their entirety without these memorable encounters. Later games have generally not had the same gravitas and memorability when encountering the main protagonist. The final confrontation with characters such as President Eden, Colonel Autumn, Kellogg, Father, and even Caesar lack the same magnitude of memorability when compared to the earlier games. Sure, some of these encounters are memorable because of narrative twists, like in the case of Father and President Eden, or some interesting interactions like Caesar giving you the chance to choose how to deal with Benny. Ultimately though, this is something that colors the player's whole recollection and perception of the game, and has been lacking in the newer games. It's something I would like to see make a return in a big way. Intimidation. While I believe having a unique antagonist is important, another important aspect is that the player finds them intimidating as well. This and the uniqueness of the antagonists work to make them and the games they are in very memorable. The level of intimidation also increases the satisfaction after finally beating the antagonist and eventually the game. So let's mix this up and talk about the weaker examples in the series first. When thinking of intimidating antagonist encounters in the post-Fallout 2 Fallout games, who really stands out? Was Father really that intimidating at any point? How about Colonel Autumn, President Eden, Caesar, or should I say Caesar? The only really great example from the latter Fallouts is Legate Lanius, with Kellogg being a step above the others, but still not as intimidating as Horrigan, the Master, or Lanius himself. While intimidation factor is certainly one of the more objective things I mentioned in this video, I think the majority of people will agree that many of the newer Fallout antagonists have not been particularly intimidating. Intimidation comes as an aggregate of many things, and isn't so much a science as it is an art form, but some things do come to mind. An imposing or frightening appearance can be immediately intimidating, and this can be furthered by a voice that is also imposing or frightening. The home, base, or lair that the antagonist calls home is reflective of them as well, and if it is exceptionally dangerous or fear-inducing, that has an effect on how we perceive the character. The Master's Lair in Fallout is a great example of this, where we encounter psychers who we have not seen in the game before, and the vault is very creepy, with strange organic growth throughout, and looking both somehow old and decayed, and alive at the same time. This all reflects on the Master, since this is his domain and gives a glimpse into how he envisions the world to be when under his control. Frank Horrigan is intimidating due to how easily we see him kill people throughout the game, and how he shrugs off any attack done to him. This makes the player always second guess themselves, and wonder if they are prepared and leveled enough to finally confront him at the climax of the story. Lanius is one of the only good examples of an exceptionally intimidating antagonist in the newer Fallouts. While more could have been done with where and how we confront Lanius if we oppose Caesar, his appearance, voice, and ironclad determination all work together to make him very intimidating, especially if we have been paying attention and know the legends that people say about him. The antagonist needs to be intimidating, but that can be done in different ways, either through cunning, treachery, or the good old-fashioned trope of big and scary sounding. I would like to enter into a final confrontation with one of the game's protagonists and be worried that I might not be strong enough to pull this fight off, or that I might die and be forced to load a previous save. This is something I have not felt often, if at all, from Fallout 3 to the present, with the previously mentioned exception of Lanius and to a much lesser degree, Kellogg. Final confrontation. The last main point that I want to make works due to the previous points mentioned, like anticipation and intimidation, but is something distinct from them as well. A large showdown or final confrontation with the antagonist is something that needs to happen if the hero's journey is anything to go by. The setting, timing, and whole reason you are there are critical components of the final showdown. Whether it is your first meeting with characters like the Master or Eden, or simply the final encounter like with Kellogg or Frank Horrigan, what matters is how memorable the final confrontation is, and how you as the player view your motivations for being there and opposing the antagonist. Let's use Frank Horrigan as an example. By the time you encounter him by the end of the game, you already know that he will be very difficult to overcome. He is intimidating, and you find yourself on the oil rig in his domain. Not only an outsider, but someone everything you encounter is openly hostile to. It is obvious at this point that Horrigan kills wantonly and has no remorse, simply furthering the goals of the Enclave to commit genocide against anyone they consider a mutant, which is almost everyone in the Wasteland. To most people, this is unjustifiable, and this coupled with a personal vendetta against Horrigan for the killing of Matthew and the Intelligent Death Claws, make anything he could possibly say to persuade us moot. He is not the kind of character to try and persuade though, and most characters know before entering the final confrontation that there is really only one way that it can all end. The battle with Horrigan is difficult, even when using some of the advantages like the turrets or the small group of Enclave soldiers who are willing to turn on him. His death is unlike any other in the game, and the fact that you are able to defeat him and watch his unique demise gives an intense sense of satisfaction that normal kills in the Wasteland just don't have. The Master is different because this is your first confrontation with him, but because of the setting and the path to get to him, he is no less intimidating. This is doubly true because of his appearance. However, he does have an interesting difference when compared to Horrigan. He speaks to considerable length about his intentions and motivations. While he genuinely seems like he is trying to convince the player that his ideology is right, he can also be reasoned with, albeit you need to pass a difficult speech check to do so. The fight with the Master is fairly difficult, and again his death is unique, which makes it all that much more memorable. When compared to the final confrontations with many of the antagonists from newer games, we find that they often do not have the same unique traits that make the confrontation any different from other character confrontations throughout the game. Some are given unique circumstances, like the ability to pass a skill check to make the encounter easier, or avoid it altogether, like in the case of Ulysses in the Lonesome Road DLC for New Vegas. However, using the final confrontation with Colonel Autumn in Fallout 3 as an example, there is nothing memorable about the confrontation. Since the final confrontation almost always happens at the end of the main narrative story, it would serve the games better to end on a strong note. There is a psychological theory called peak end theory that states that our memory of an event is not a sum or average of our feelings through the entire experience. Instead, it's largely based on two things: what we are feeling at the most extreme, which is referred to as the peak, and how we felt at the very end. The final showdown is often how the game ends, and if that ending is non-impactful, disappointing, or a non-event, then that will do a lot to color our memory of the experience. These large showdowns, when done well, will have us looking back on the game fondly. This is why I believe this is an important point that future games need to take into serious consideration to give us the best possible Fallout experience. Now, I do want to make a few points here at the end. It may seem like my purpose here is to bash Bethesda or point out the superiority of Interplay/Black Isle/Obsidian. This is far from the case, and is simply an example where creative differences led to different emphases on different things. These points are also not extremely strict points that must be adhered to dogmatically. There is more than enough room for creativity and differences to keep things from becoming stale. Some antagonists were so stalwart in their beliefs that they continued unshaken to their violent demise. Others have a committed philosophy and paradigm, but will bend to sufficient evidence or persuasion. Some situations can be solved peacefully, while others there is only a violent option. How exactly these points are achieved doesn't matter as much as successfully achieving them. That is it for this portion of the video. But I want to take some time to highlight and showcase some of your insightful comments or corrections. A few of you commented that I forgot to mention a unique wrench in my melee weapons video. Big Jim is a legendary monkey wrench with the knee capper perk with a 20% chance to cripple legs, and it is truly a shame I forgot to mention this great leg breaker. A few pointed out that the cattle prod does indeed make an appearance in Fallout 4, but it is not a weapon and is labeled as the robot repair kit. The similar appearance between these two items and their much different use could make for some interesting fan theories or headcanons, so give me what you got. Vargan1414 points out, among many other things, that the name Vibroblade, which was part of the Ripper's name in the original Fallouts, is also the name for Boba Fett's belt-mounted blade in Star Wars. Starlight mentions that the dynamite spear has a real-world analog in the Lunge Mine, which, notably, a version was used by the Japanese Empire during World War II. Although the mine was a shaped charge in order to penetrate heavy armor, it still had the unfortunate side effect of killing its user. Emonda Nexus has a good comment where he talks about what the jawbone from the cultist dagger might be from, and it is worth a read. Fluffy Towels reminded me that I forgot the unique Bowie knife variant from Fallout New Vegas, called Blood Nap, that does bonus critical damage, increase the chances of a critical hit, and adds +10 to sneak. He and a few others also mentioned that the mechanic's best friend has a gear wedged into the wrench mouth and not a circular blade. For all those that mentioned the throwing spears or other throwing weapons, I decided to classify weapons that are only thrown in their own category. Although I did cheat with the gold nugget because I'm consistently inconsistent. I would also like to mention the point made about Jet not being in Fallout 76, being an important distinction because of the confusion caused by Fallout 4, making us believe a retcon had made the chem have pre-war origins. I'm not saying the lore is one way or another, but it also means that there is a valid discussion to be had, due to the information we have available through the games. Thanks for making it to the end of this video. This is the first video of this type where I actively compare games based purely on subjectivity, and if it is something you enjoyed, let me know and I can work to make more of them. I am interested to hear whether you agree or disagree, so make your thoughts known and leave a comment. I wish you all a great day and may you all walk in Adam's glow.